Hello and welcome to the Sacred Truth channel. Today, I want to take you on a journey that goes beyond what you've ever heard about faith, pain, and redemption. I want you to approach the most powerful silence in human history, the silence of Calvary. But before we begin, I ask you to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell, because this is content that will touch your heart in a way you will never forget. And I also want you at the end to comment on what impacted you the most. Your reflections are important. Calvary is not just a place. It is not just a hill in Jerusalem, marked by a historical event. It is the place where silence became more eloquent than any word. Imagine the sky darkening, the wind ceasing, the crowd standing still, not understanding what was truly happening. Every gaze, every gesture, every cry that echoed at that moment contrasted with absolute silence, the silence of a God who carried upon himself all the pain, all the weight, and all the guilt of the world. In this silence, there was no lack of meaning. On the contrary, there was intensity, there was purpose. Jesus was before the cross, and in the silence that seemed empty, he carried the entire history of humanity. It was a silence that spoke of unconditional love, absolute forgiveness, total surrender. It was a silence that challenged human understanding, because it showed that the greatest strength is not always in action, but in the willingness to endure, to surrender, and to transform simply by remaining faithful to the truth. And it is at this point that you need to reflect. How often do you expect immediate action? How often do you look for loud answers, grand signs, external changes? The silence of Calvary teaches us that very often, the deepest transformation happens away from the eyes of the world, in the place where no one sees, at the moment when no one notices. It is in this silent space that true surrender manifests. While Jesus carried the cross, while the weight of the world's sin pressed on his shoulders, humanity remained unaware, distracted, indifferent, and yet he remained. This is the first great teaching of Calvary: to remain even when everything seems lost, to remain even when no one recognizes it, to remain even when the pain seems unbearable. And I want you to think with me, in your life today, how often does it require exactly this from you? Remaining in faith when no one else believes? Remaining in love when everything around seems unjust? Remaining in truth when the world prefers lies? The silence of Calvary is not just historical, it is personal. It speaks directly to every heart that needs to learn that true strength lies in silent persistence, in faith that continues even in the face of pain. Now, if you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe now and leave your comment on how you understand the silence of Calvary in your life. This reflection is what transforms viewers into people who live the message, who internalize the story and let it change their hearts. And as we observe Jesus in that moment, we see that the cross is not just an instrument of pain. It is the meeting point between justice and mercy. It is where human error finds absolute forgiveness. It is where love ceases to be a concept and becomes action. Every nail, every hammer blow, every silent look between father and son carried a message. The world can try to destroy, reject, and hurt, but true love remains. And here is the deepest lesson you must keep. The greatest transformation does not come from punishment. It does not come from imposition. It does not come from what men can do. It comes from what God does through silence, through surrender, through that which no one sees but changes everything. The silence of Calvary is, above all, a lesson of hope. Because even in the darkest moment, something magnificent is being prepared, something that would forever change the history of humanity. We reach the culminating point. Jesus is nailed to the cross. The world watches, some curious, others indifferent, others full of hatred. But what impresses the most is not the crowd's shout, not the sound of the hammer, not the creaking of the wood. That is the silence, a silence that carries more meaning than any sound, a silence that speaks of forgiveness where only anger is expected, a silence that chooses to love where everyone chooses to harm. In that silence, he looks at those crucifying him and says, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Here is the most shocking and profound lesson. True power is not in retaliation, in destroying and imposing human justice. True power is in remaining in love, in becoming a bridge, in transforming through forgiveness, even when no one understands. And this is exactly what makes Calvary so revolutionary. The world saw defeat. God saw victory. And it is important for you to realize this. Often in life, we think that justice or victory depends on what we see, what we hear, or what we feel. But Calvary teaches us something very different. True transformation, eternal victory, happens even in silence, in what human eyes cannot immediately perceive. What seems like failure to the world may be the greatest demonstration of power and love ever seen. As Jesus suffers, we see another aspect of this silence: loneliness. Despite being surrounded by people, he is alone in the weight of the mission. No one could carry that for him. No one could bear the burden of human sin. This silence confronts us directly. There are moments in your life when responsibility, pain, or mission cannot be shared. And in those moments, it is silent faith, internal surrender, that sustains everything. And then, at the peak of suffering, he does not merely endure, he transforms. Every pain, every wound, every moment of rejection and contempt becomes a bridge for redemption. Every tear, every silent sigh, every gesture of surrender is a lesson. Suffering, when united with faith and purpose, does not destroy, it transforms. And at this point, I want you to reflect deeply. How many times do you try to avoid pain, difficulty, or rejection? How many times do you flee challenges that could transform you? The silence of Calvary shows us that transformation does not come from the easy, the comfortable, or what pleases the senses. It comes from the commitment to remain, to endure, to trust even when everything seems lost. If you haven't commented yet, write now what impacted you most so far. Share your reflections, because every comment strengthens our community and reminds us that we are not alone on this journey of understanding and faith. And then something that changes everything. Jesus' final cry, "It is finished." It is not just a phrase. It is the confirmation that the mission was accomplished, that love triumphed, that divine justice found its way. The silence that began at Calvary transforms into eternal sound, the resonance of hope, forgiveness, and reconnection with God. And here is the greatest lesson for all of us. The cross is not just a past story. It is a present invitation. It challenges us to remain in love, to forgive, to surrender who we are and what we have, even when it is painful, even when it seems unjust, even when no one recognizes it. It teaches us that true strength is not external. It is internal. It is not noise. It is silence. It is not imposition. It is surrender. And now I want you to ask yourself, are you willing to live the silence of Calvary in your own life? Are you willing to love when no one loves? To forgive when everyone seeks revenge? To remain when everything around falls apart? Because this is the eternal lesson of Calvary. Transformation does not happen by what we see, but by what we allow God to do in us, in the silence of surrender and faith. And finally, remember, the resurrection is not just a miraculous event of the past. It is a living promise that what is true, what is just, and what is pure will never be destroyed. Calvary shows that even in extreme pain, even in apparent failure, there is purpose, there is redemption, there is transformation, there is new life. As we reflect on the resurrection, we need to understand that this is a moment of complete redefinition. Nothing will ever be the same again. The world, the disciples, the religious leaders, the history of humanity, everything changes in the face of this silent act of power and authority. What seemed final, definitive, and overwhelming becomes beginning, hope, and opportunity. And at this point, the deepest lesson emerges. True transformation does not depend on external circumstances, but on the ability to recognize and accept what transcends human understanding. Imagine the disciples that morning. The pain of loss still weighed on their hearts. They had followed the Master, had believed, seen miracles, heard teachings that defied human logic, and yet nothing prepared them for absence, for the silence after the crucifixion. Death seemed final. Fear and confusion dominated every thought. But something changed imperceptibly. The stone removed, the empty tomb, the silence that now became a sign. The resurrection did not arrive with a bang, but with silent evidence. And this is exactly how God operates in many lives. Not in a dramatic and noisy way, but in a manner that only the attentive and prepared can perceive. And here is the first crucial point. The resurrection shows us that the impossible can be real. Everything that seemed lost, all hope crushed, all human expectations frustrated, can be restored, but not by our own strength, not by human merit, not by logic or understanding, but by the action of God and the faith that persists even when there is no visible sign. Every rebirth in our lives, every moment when we overcome challenges that seemed insurmountable, every inner transformation that no one sees, is a direct reflection of that same power that manifested in the empty tomb. I want you to reflect. How often do you face situations that seem final, irreversible, impossible to change? How often do you feel that every effort is in vain, that all faith is useless, that all hope is lost? It is precisely in these moments that Calvary and the resurrection speak loudest, because they teach us that change, victory, and restoration do not depend on what we see, what we feel, or what the world recognizes. They depend on God's action and the willingness to open the heart to receive transformation. And that is why at this point, I want you to subscribe to the channel. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any content that awakens reflection, faith, and change. And in the comments, share what this story means to you. Every word you write strengthens this community and helps others see beyond the obvious. Returning to the narrative, when Jesus appears to the disciples, he does not arrive with words of accusation or reprimand for their fear, nor for the disbelief they had during the crucifixion. He comes with peace. He comes with reconciliation. He comes offering understanding and clarity. The resurrection is proof that even when we fail, even when we doubt, even when we get lost, there is a bridge for reconnection. There is opportunity to start over. There is a chance for real transformation. And here comes the second great lesson. True transformation begins within. It is not just about external behavioral or circumstantial changes. It is about changing perspective, heart, and intention. This is what differentiates those who remain in the chaos and challenges of life from those who are transformed by the silent power of Calvary and the resurrection. The resurrection also teaches us about courage. Courage to keep going even when we don't understand. Courage to trust even when the path is dark. Courage to remain in faith even when the world around collapses. How many moments in your life demanded that silent courage, that faith that defies human understanding, that hope that persists even in the face of the impossible? Calvary, and the resurrection show us that it is precisely in these moments that true life is revealed. And here comes the third great lesson. Silence is not empty. Silence carries meaning, purpose, and power. The silence of the cross, which seemed like defeat, revealed the greatest act of love and redemption in history. The silence of the tomb, which seemed like darkness and absence, revealed the most powerful life that has ever existed. And the same silence can be present in your life, in moments when everything seems stagnant, lost, or meaningless, because the power of transformation often manifests in the invisible, the unseen, the intimate. The resurrection also teaches us about forgiveness, because the ultimate transformation that Jesus offers is not only to heal the body, not only to restore external relationships, but to heal the human heart, to reconcile man with God, with himself and with others. Forgiveness is not merely a moral choice. It is an act of liberation. It frees from internal chains, past guilt, fears, and resentments that paralyze us. And the resurrection is the greatest example of this. Jesus forgives, restores, reconnects, transforms. And here comes the fourth great lesson. A transformed life requires action. The resurrection is not just contemplation, not just knowledge. It requires a response. It requires decision. It requires each of us to rise from fear, doubt, and silent inaction, and allow God's power to work in life, generating real, lasting, visible change in the heart and mind. As we reflect on this, it is important to realize something. The resurrection does not merely confirm victory over death, but also redefines our relationship with life. Everything we do, feel, and think now gains new meaning. Every challenge, every pain, every moment of loneliness can be transformed into learning, growth, and faith. Because what is true and eternal does not depend on what we see or feel, but on what God works within us. I want you to reflect. How many times have you experienced something that seemed meaningless, but later you realized it was a turning point, a lesson, or a transformation? The resurrection shows that nothing is lost, nothing is in vain, nothing escapes the divine purpose. If you have not shared your thoughts yet, do so now. Write how you can apply the lessons of Calvary and the resurrection in your daily life. Every comment is more than a word. It is a seed of transformation for you and for those who read it. And now we arrive at the fifth great lesson. The resurrection is an invitation to action. Jesus did not return just to be admired, studied, or remembered. He returned so that each of us could live a transformed life, so that we could love where there is hatred, forgive where there is resentment, remain where there is abandonment, surrender where there is doubt. Every act of faith, every act of love, every choice to persist in truth is a living manifestation of the resurrection. Allowing oneself to be transformed is not easy. It requires courage, faith, surrender, and persistence. It requires looking within and confronting your own shadows, your pain, fears, and limitations. But this is exactly how the power of Calvary remains alive, not in stone, wood, or physical space, but within the human heart, willing to listen, learn, and change. So, leave your final comment. How will you allow the silence of Calvary and the resurrection to change your life? Like, share, subscribe. Because this is the message that transcends centuries, challenges cultures, and transforms lives. And you are being called to be part of it now in this very moment. The story does not end at the tomb. It continues in every choice, in every decision to love, forgive, and remain. It continues in every silent act of faith, every moment of courage, every step taken toward transformation. Calvary teaches us that true love is silent, patient, and constant. The resurrection shows us that hope never dies. And what you do with this determines not only your destiny, but also the way you impact the world around you. So rise, remain, love, forgive, transform, because true life, eternal life, life worth living, begins when you allow the silence of Calvary and the resurrection of Jesus to work in you. And remember, Calvary is just the beginning. The resurrection is just the first step. Transformation is the daily mission renewed with every choice, every thought, every action. Now the final question remains, echoing through the silence that spans centuries. Will you just hear this story, or will you live the transformation it offers? Because to remain, love, forgive, and surrender, that is what changes everything.